Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 5:07 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program from the Washington Free Beacon, Joe Simonson, who's got a brand new report on how the Biden administration's climate agenda is smashing headlong into the Biden administration's DEI agenda, and couldn't happen to a better group of people. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. For some time now, any clear-thinking person has raised a healthy degree of skepticism about our commitment in Ukraine, all of the money and weapons that have been flowing there, all of the hundreds of thousands of lives reportedly lost, asking for some accountability, trying to prevent corruption, the basics in terms of looking out for the American people and our involvement there. But if you ask those questions, if you raise objections to the way the Biden administration has been conducting itself with big help from Congress, well, you may just end up on an enemies list, paid for by U.S. taxpayers. For more on this, I want to bring in Bradley Devlin now. He's a political editor for the American Conservative, and, well, he just received a very interesting and kind of intimidating letter about what's going on with his life. Bradley, good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks, Vince.
So Congressman Jim Banks has been digging in here, and he found something of interest, and he notified you. You're on a list, Bradley. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this list is kind of a who's who of restraint world here in Washington, which is a small community that doesn't want to get us into every war that the military-industrial complex dangles in front of us. And, whenever they put a web together, Vince, that's when you kind of know that this is all just kabuki theater, right? We've traced all the different connections in this giant web of Ukraine objectors, and therefore we now know who our real targets are in the United States. First off, it's absolutely ludicrous that Democrats voted against pulling funds from any sort of institution like this today in the House Appropriations Committee. But second, this is just the type of tactics that come from a very, very corrupt country. I don't know why anyone is surprised by this at all. Representative Banks sent me a letter saying that he wanted to notify me of that situation if I wasn't already aware, and that he was going to push for amendments to the appropriations process that prevented future funding for organizations like this, which is a Ukraine-funded NGO backed by State Department dollars and State Department know-how. And luckily, a lot of Republicans who continue to fund Ukraine defense for some reason voted in favor of that amendment. So hopefully organizations like this, which is called TXT, will not be receiving taxpayer dollars in the future.
It's known as the Ukraine-based Data Journalism Agency. As you point out, the acronym is TXT, and they put together a list of 388 individuals and 76 different organizations. I'm quoting here from Breitbart News. They say they're on the list. Breitbart News is one of the organizations listed. Also, Jim Banks, the congressman, a Navy veteran, chairman of the House Armed Services Military Readiness Subcommittee, also on the list. And so ultimately what we're seeing here is American taxpayer dollars flowing through an organization that is designating Americans as enemies. This is crazy. And why are we funding this?
Well, because I've heard it said that Democrats don't actually have foreign enemies. The left doesn't actually have foreign enemies. They have foreign enemies that remind them of their domestic enemies. And it's no surprise whatsoever that the State Department and the foreign policy apparatus in Washington has been weaponized against regular conservative Americans, common sense Americans, since the war on terror began in 2001, right? You can trace it back to the Patriot Act. You can even trace it back to the early part of the 20th century with the Espionage Act, which was used to quash anti-interventionist speech with respect to World War I. So it is no surprise to me that progressives continue to use this tactic of trying to take not only the Department of Justice, which is a domestic institution, but our foreign policy institutions, and turn them back on the American citizen whose views they hate.
And it's important to note that, insofar as we assess the viewpoints of the people who are listed here, it seems to me that everybody involved is either arguing for, as you point out, restraint or scrutiny about the way American treasure is being spent in Ukraine. And these are not people who are like, offering the Russians intel on how to attack Ukraine or advancing Russian propaganda or whatever. I mean, it's like these are just normal Americans who would like some accountability, and they end up on an enemies list.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the funniest thing with this whole exchange with Congressman Banks is Congressman Banks was sanctioned by Russia in April of 2022 for being morally on the side of the Ukrainians. And of course, now we find ourselves 2.5 years later in 2024, where Jim Banks finds himself on a list as people who are Putin stooges, Kremlin, disseminating Kremlin misinformation and whatever label that the Biden Justice Department or the Biden FBI wants to put on just rhetoric that tries to control or to at least fight back against the narratives that the State Department is pushing at the moment.
Yeah.
And poll after poll shows that more and more Americans are waking up to this fact, that more and more Americans are growing skeptical of not only our involvement in Ukraine, but also our involvement in Israel, whether it is on the side of the Israelis or on the side of the Palestinians, right? That kind of breaks down along party lines. But people are increasingly skeptical of America's capabilities to interject in these conflicts while also preparing for possible bigger conflicts and bigger competition with China and the CCP.
Well, also, I think at its core, people just want to be treated like adults, who are supposed to be in charge of their political system. And so if you're going to get us involved in foreign conflicts, you damn well better offer a rationale as to why and how it's specifically in our interest. And I've noticed that, especially when it comes to Ukraine, that Congress and everybody involved never really spares a moment to try and justify it to the voters. They just kind of wield moral blackmail around the issue. And then beyond that, say that, don't ask any other questions. And yet the questions are there's a lot of them, including what's the end game here? That's the question that's been asked since this all began. What is our end game? And what is the evidence that this is going to lead Ukraine to prevail? Nobody's ever offered evidence to support that. In fact, all the evidence is countervailing. Russia has reconstituted its military strength. Russia has way more people to throw at this. There have been hundreds of thousands of deaths. There's no actual sign that the Biden administration is trying to move towards pushing everybody involved towards negotiated peace. This is just ongoing chaos and disaster.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And one thing that I think our side of the ledger on the right could do better is we aren't prone to give emotional arguments about this. We are unapologetically America first in the way that we are thinking about foreign affairs, right? It's got to be in our national interests first and foremost, in the interest of the people of this great country. But we also don't beat this drum enough that Ukraine is getting beat. A negotiated settlement is actually the best outcome for the people of Ukraine, who keep getting sent into meat grinders because the West and the United States want to keep waging a proxy war against Russia because there are still unanswered questions about the 2016 election in their minds. It's really what I think this all comes down to, is that there has just been this bloodlust for Russia since the Russia collusion hoax back in 2016 that ended in an unsatisfactory fashion for the left. And so now they got to get us into a war to exact their revenge, to protect our democracy through protecting Ukraine's democracy, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that democracy is always the central argument from the left. But we should do a better job at saying this is actually the best result for Ukrainians. I don't want to see the next generation of Ukrainians dead. I want to see Ukraine to continue to exist as a nation, as a peoples. That doesn't mean that we write them blank checks. That doesn't mean we keep doing what we're doing right now, Vince, which is the Biden administration is preparing to send another Patriot missile system to the Ukrainians in order to continue the perpetuation of the war. And in appropriations, they're probably going to try to hamstring President Trump when he comes back to power in 2025 from being able to find a settlement.
Well, and hamstring Trump, what that means really is that they're trying to subvert the voters. They don't want the voters to change U.S. policy. So they're trying to insulate Washington's, as we say, the uniparty. They're trying to insulate the foreign policy agenda from the voters having any power over it.
Even more than that, Vince, I mean, it effectively means that the Constitution isn't in operation anymore. If the president doesn't have the powers of the presidency, you are living in a post-constitutional republic, if you can even call it a republic anymore. Either the president has the executive powers of the presidency or he does not. I'm sick and tired of hearing from the left, especially the establishment left and the establishment right here in Washington, especially in the foreign policy arenas, that there needs to be guardrails around the president. I'm sorry, that's not how this system works. We have different checks and balances between the legislature and the judiciary, but enough of this, well, what we really need is another CIA operation to make sure that the guardrails stay on President Trump. What we really need is another Mark Milley calling up his buddy from the CCP and saying, I'll tip you off if this crazy man Trump decides to attack China. We either have a constitutional republic or we don't, and the left is making it very, very clear that they want the republic to end. So vote accordingly.
They've become very accustomed to wielding unconstitutional power on a routine basis, as you point out. Bradley Devlin with the American Conservative, thank you so much for your time today, sir. And hopefully we stop funding all of these places that are putting you on enemies lists. I think that'd be nice.
Well, Vince, after this conversation, you'll be on the list too, so it'll be good company.
Thanks, Bradley. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got John calling in from Alexandria on line 2. John, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello. John, are you there with us? John's been waiting for a bit, so.
Yeah, I'm here.
Away. There you are. Hey, John.
Yeah. Hey. Thanks for, taking the call. I've actually been waiting to get with you on this when you got back. But, I think we're as Republicans, we're kind of missing the forest through the trees here. We're so caught up in, blaming the FBI and, affecting the last election, which they did. We might be missing out the opportunity to use this laptop to positively affect the current and future election. So, I think we need to, start to, the fact that this was bona fide, admissible in court as fact, the Democrats, can't run from that. And, I think we need to, point to the big guy here and talk about all the deals that the laptop has in its insides.
Yeah, that seems important. So you think that there should be a change, some sort of change in strategy in the way the right talks about this? Because the relevance of the past here, I think, is immense, given that it points to kind of like the way the left behaves in the face of all of this overwhelming evidence and what they're attempting to do again this cycle.
There's no doubt about it. I think, if we're pointing to all the missteps like the FBI and all that and going after Giuliani and, then we're missing the point of the laptop to begin with. We need to talk about we need to reset the tape and, we've got the laptop now. So
right.
Let's use it like we were going to use it before. Let's pick up the 20% or 17% of the voters that said, boy, had we known about the laptop, what we know now, we would have voted differently.
It's interesting. I wonder to what extent that those voters you're talking about that was captured in that Media Research Center poll back ahead of the 2020 election, or right after it, actually. I wonder what percent have already come over to Trump's side, because I'm looking at these numbers and there's clearly a shift going on. People very disenchanted with the Biden presidency. But it's a good point that laptop has been authenticated 6 ways from Sunday, and we should be dwelling on every element that demonstrates just how unfit Joe Biden is for this particular office. I totally agree with you on that, John. Thank you for the call and for waiting.
You bet.
On this issue, on Hunter Biden in particular, there's been some questions. Will Joe Biden pardon Hunter? And he told David Muir last week, a guy who looks like he's 20, but I think he's actually in his 50s or something. He might be 60. He's way older than he looks. He's got the Karinge Jean-Pierre thing going on. Here's Joe Biden talking to David Muir last week.
Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Yes. I think this last gasps. Karinge was asked about this today. Okay, a pardon, fine, but what about a commutation? Listen to how squirrely she gets.
You're not ruling out that he would commute the sentence.
What I'm saying is that the president, I have not spoken to the president about this, and what I'm saying is he was asked about a pardon. He was asked about the trial specifically, and he answered it very clearly, very forthright. As we know, the sentencing hasn't even been scheduled yet. I don't have anything beyond what the president said. He's been very clear about this.
Let me just translate that for you. No consequences for Hunter. That's what the White House is saying today by not saying it. Coming up, Joe Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon with us. The left-wing agenda of the White House, well, it's going to war with itself. It's the best. Joe Simonson's up next. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 5:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joe Biden and company want you to give them credit for spending $1.2 trillion of your money on the so-called Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. As a part of that act, they claim they're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations by 2030. But they're nowhere close to that. Nowhere close to that. We're just 6 years away. And how many have they built? I think, well, the answer is 7. Here's Mayor Pete Buttigieg on CBS recently, and Margaret Brennan even was saying, what the hell's going on?
The Federal Highway Administration says only 7 or 8 charging stations have been produced with a $7.5 billion investment that taxpayers made back in 2021. Why isn't that happening more quickly?
So the president's goal is to have 500,000 chargers up by the end of this decade. Now, in order to do a charger, it's more than just plunking a small device into the ground. There's utility work, and this is also really a new category of federal investment. But we've been working with each of the 50 states. Every one of them is getting formula dollars to do this work, engaging them in the first handful. Again, by 2030, 500,000 chargers. And the very first handful of chargers are now already being physically built.
They built 7. It's 7. It's more than just plunking stuff into the ground, said Mayor Pete. He's so smart. Yeah, it's a lot more than that. In fact, the Biden administration's agenda has really complicated their stupid climate agenda as well. For more on this, I want to bring in the guy who's breaking this story. Joe Simonson, senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon, joins us on the phone. Hello, Joe.
Vince, how are we?
I'm doing great, and I'm tickled to death that Biden's various radical agendas are all running headlong into one another. Why is it taking so long to, get those extension cords out and build some charging stations?
Well, part of it, as I reported in my report that came out today, is that there are all sorts of onerous equity regulations, new thanks to the Biden administration, for any contractor who wants to build an electric vehicle charging station. Those regulations include obviously stuff like union labor, but also things such as you need community involvement. You need to go and hold like town hall meetings in middle school gyms to hear feedback and make sure you have a translator because there could be people in your community who don't speak another language, to hear what your community has to say, all to build a single electric vehicle charger. You need to go to, if you apply for these grants to build it, you need to have equity plans. And you need to address all sorts of concerns that the Department of Transportation and the federal government more generally have. That means making sure underserved communities are somehow benefiting from your, again, Vince, single electric vehicle charger. This is to break ground. You have to go through all these hoops. You have to tell them, well, how are you going to employ minority-owned businesses for this plan, for your electric vehicle charger? How are you going to help women? How are you going to help are you going to hire lots of minorities to do this? We want a plan. You need to show us how to do it. And the point is that the applications for grant money are now spiraling out of control. They take forever. And I've spoken with Department of Transportation employees, and no one knows how to apply for these grants because this is all totally new. It seems completely irrelevant, again, to building a single electric vehicle charger. You need to, one suggestion from the Department of Transportation is why don't you host some sort of lottery or why don't you gamify community involvement? Why don't you host some sort of like fake game show in the local community to get feed? I mean, it's absurd. And again, this is to build one electric vehicle charger.
And some huge percentage of the actual labor has to be done by non-white people. That's one of the requirements?
No. Well, no, Vince. They can't go that far. They can't say you have to only hire minorities or you have to have a woman-owned business. But, boy, we have 3 categories of who should get this money: highly qualified, qualified, and not qualified. And all the highly qualified applicants, what we want is a plan to show us how you're going to make that happen. That would really make a big difference to us, the federal government, if you could show us how you're going to employ women and minorities to build, again, a single electric vehicle charger.
I mean, what does the race? I mean, I guess I understand how this happens. This is the radicalism of the left, but what does the race or gender of the contractor have to do with just building an electric vehicle charger? I mean, doesn't it seem like the obvious thing is just find the most cost-effective and yet quality contractor and just build these things?
One would think, Vince, but I spoke to some people for the story, and you start getting the feeling this isn't really about electric vehicle chargers. This is about redistributing federal dollars to various Democratic constituencies, because you raise a good point. Why would a contract, apparently the planet's going to be on fire in 5 years, 10 years, whatever the newest number is. And it is more important to make sure you have a minority contractor to build one electric vehicle charger than it is to actually build the electric vehicle charger. And as you point out, only 7 have been built.
You know something? I have a suggestion for you. You should put this question to one of the artificial intelligence platforms and see how they handle it. Like, what's more important? What's more important, hiring a minority business or saving the planet? And see what it says. Because
I think I know the answer. Unfortunately, I'm scared.
I know it's because we've seen this before, right? Have you seen the experiment that people have been running on OpenAI or ChatGPT? They say if you had to misgender someone in order to stop a nuclear attack, would that be allowable? And they say no, it's not allowed. You can't misgender someone to stop a nuclear attack.
That's exactly right, and I think unfortunately that same rationale applies to federal contracting now, and so I think part of one of the more pernicious problems with how this is all done, aside from the fact it's inherently unfair and things aren't getting built, is that when 2030 ends, and I'm going to make a bold prediction, we're not going to have 500,000 electric vehicle chargers by 2030, and when that happens, suddenly the Democrats now have a new excuse to spend another $1.whatever trillion infrastructure package. We just don't have enough. And these requirements, Vince, it's called the Justice 40 Initiative, is the official name, and it was signed through an executive order by Biden shortly after he took office. This applies to every grant, essentially, almost every grant going forward in this country. All those requirements we just were talking about, that applies to bridges. That applies to repurposing mines. That applies to all sorts of things. And I think it's funny because Joe Biden has privately griped, why am I not getting credit for all these bills? Why is nothing getting built? What's going on? And if you look at Democratic pundits, they're constantly scratching their heads like, why doesn't anyone appreciate what Joe Biden has done for us? And the answer is you can't see it because it's not getting done.
Well, yeah. And also, the whole point of this electric vehicle thing, with all these charging stations, is they're trying to force the market into a behavior. It's not one that the market wants, because if people were wild about electric vehicles, you wouldn't need the government to step in to build EV charging stations. You have these things going up just based on free market principles. Does the government, or did the government, pay for gas stations all across the country? No, gas stations came up as a natural result of market needs. And here we have just a completely, this is a command economy move, where you're forcing consumers into behaviors that they wouldn't otherwise do.
And I think that's exactly right. And sort of another troubling aspect of this is that various states and the federal government are working to essentially outlaw gas vehicles really in the next decade. I think in California, you won't be able to buy one by 2030. Maybe it's a few years after that. But and then when that happens, barring some sort of change in federal policy or state policy, there are not going to be any electric vehicle chargers for you to even use.
Yeah, and we don't have a grid to even support it. So that's all the fun that we have to look forward to. All right, well, Joe Simonson, thank you for covering all of this. Thank you for once again reminding us that Mayor Pete is not actually that impressive, despite what they keep telling us. And really appreciate your time and reporting as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vince.
That's Joe Simonson at the Washington Free Beacon, pointing out that the left is awful at this, and the government, yet again, not efficient at all. Not efficient at all. Let's see here. Tom's calling in from Alexandria, line 2. Tom, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yes. Just to back up what you're saying there, if you look at this, the only people who can really afford EVs, new EVs, that is, are people who are not going to be in the quote-unquote areas. So why is there this big push that they have to go in those areas and to ensure equity, building stations where the cars aren't going to be in? It's just stupid as heck.
It
but
is
the bottom
stupid.
line is,
so in other words, like the EVs are so expensive that that the so-called underserved communities are priced out of them. That's true. But here's the dirty secret, which is not much of a secret. People know, which is that the auto companies are subsidizing the cost of these EVs by jacking up the price on their internal combustion engines in order to meet the government demands here. So as a result, the underserved communities, which are better served by gas vehicles, they have to pay more now for internal combustion engine vehicles because of the EV mandates. In other words, they're being hit with increased expenses every direction.
Government always manages to do this, to shift money from the many to the hands of the few, while claiming to do the opposite. Yeah. The other thing I want to point out on electric vehicles is the complete shortage of mechanics, complete shortage of parts, and I suggest that you go out looking at used car dealership. I've got one in our area in Woodbridge, loads of Teslas just sitting there on the used market. The reality is the cost of replacing the batteries at the 8 to 10 year mark, you're expected to replace them, is about 50% of the entire cost of the vehicle. Several people have had it for a month or several months, only to find all of a sudden it's malfunctioning, go in and find, oh, you got to replace the batteries. And now they got to pay the same or more that they just dished out for the vehicle to be able to replace the batteries. So there's nothing cost effective about it, which means that if you look at it, as people are learning about this very bad aspect of EVs, the used market, your ability to sell and the price on the used market it's tanking. People don't want them because they realize they're going to dish out all this money, and then all of a sudden they're going to have to take out a huge loan now to buy batteries to replace the batteries. And then we've all the discussion, you've mentioned it, the literal stripping, strip mining that has to be done to get the metals, the particulars to make the batteries. Sure. And when they do wear out, it's not like you can recycle them. So now they've replaced carbon with this massive solid waste problem with toxic batteries. Now what do we do with that? For solving one problem, and they're not really solving it.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. There's a tremendous amount of environmental damage going on that it's just a different form of pollution, and actually more meaningful pollution that's going on here, and it gets completely discounted. I'm not against electric vehicles. I think they're kind of cool. If people want to buy them, that's great. But I'm tired of all the lies about them. I don't like that part. All right, let us see here. Well, stand by. I've got more of your calls coming up and more information as always, including I've got Pete Buttigieg. I've got more Pete Buttigieg audio today. He's angry at the Alitos, Justice Alito and his wife, because they fly American flags outside of their homes. Pete Buttigieg is against those because he's a jerk. Oh, I promised I'd share with you some Border Patrol agent audio. This was on CNN. I love when things are going so badly for the left that it even breaks through on CNN. They're like, well, there was a reporter on the border trying to figure out what's going on there. And a Border Patrol agent asked for his identity to be shielded so he could speak candidly about Joe Biden and what they're allowing into our country right now. Take a listen.
What do you think this executive order, is that going to do anything?
Well, it only took him, 3 years and 7 months?
In a rare encounter.
It only took him, 3 years and 7 months?
We meet a Border Patrol agent eager to vent. He asks us to mask his identity, worried he'll be fired for talking so openly.
Well, his job to get the crime here at the border. We didn't have to babysit.
Does it frustrate you when you hear that, when you hear the narrative, like, why aren't Border Patrol doing anything? And
our hands are tied. If I don't allow them to cross and they call and complain, now I'm in trouble. I'm going to lose my job.
He blames the current administration.
He said, if I don't allow them to cross, meaning illegal foreign nationals into our country, then I'm in trouble. So what a shame. And, of course, that guy's speaking for so many Border Patrol agents. Imagine being so frustrated. You go and you speak to the press and you're like, please shield my identity because I'm just going to say that I'm not allowed to do my job. And if they find out who I am, they're going to hurt me. That's just awful. And that's the current state of play with the Border Patrol, quite unfortunately. Let's go to the phones now. I've got Rick calling in from Manassas. He's on line 1. Rick, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, Vince. Welcome back. Mike
Thank
did
you.
a great job while you were in sick leave.
Mike's the best. Mike's a great man.
Your previous caller discussed federal contracting on Pete Buttigieg. There is something called the Davis-Bacon Act. It dates back to World War II, a little bit post-World War II. Requires union labor on any federal job. They have to do environmental impact statements on every site, and then you have to deal with all the different zoning codes, local and national electric code. They'll be lucky to get 8 done in a year. Now, they started them, but you really ought to bird dog that project. They're going to fail.
It's funny. I just got a text message from our friend Daniel Turner. He pointed out how funny it is that they don't even know how many they've built. In the audio I played, it was 7 or 8. They have no idea how many they've even achieved. So it's just ridiculous. But you're right. There's all sorts of government speed bumps to productivity, and Biden has only added to those with his own demented programs.
And I guarantee to you, in that any federal contract and any money they give out, there are DEI requirements.
Yep.
Section 8A set-asides that mandate a percentage going to women-owned, lesbian-owned, bisexual, African-American, Puerto Rican, Asian-American. It's disgusting. I worked in the federal government 3 or 4 times under Republicans, and the federal procurement rules would make your head spin.
Oh my gosh! Well, they say diversity is our strength, and so we've built 7 EV stations with all of that strength. Thank you, Rick. That's a great call. I do have more Pete Buttigieg audio for you. The issue I'm running into right now is I've run out of time. So what I'll probably do is share it with you tomorrow. He's insane. It's going to continue to be that way, so we'll have plenty of content to share. Up next on this great station, the great one, Mark Levin on WMAL. Have a great evening. Back with you tomorrow.